This is the Building Automation Monthly Podcast with Phil Zito, episode 100. Hey folks, Phil Zito here, and welcome to the 100th episode of the Building Automation Monthly Podcast. And in this episode, I am going to recap what's happened in the past 99 episodes, kind of tell you what the Building Automation Monthly Podcast is, who I am, how I came about, because I realize I've got a lot of new listeners, and quite honestly, I would prefer you don't listen to episode 1 because it just is painful to listen to. I've come a long way since that time. So let's dive in. So what is the Building Automation Monthly Podcast, and what is Building Automation Monthly, and who am I? So my name is Phil Zito. I've been in the BAS industry since 2007, before which I was in the U.S. military and got out and had a choice to make between a couple different jobs and chose building automation and haven't looked back since. And Building Automation Monthly came about from kind of a passion project that I was working on. I was running a blog and just taking my knowledge and having a creative outlet, being able to kind of channel my ideas and my thoughts and being able to share those with other people. And what I noticed was that there weren't any blogs really out on the internet at the time. There wasn't anything that was educational. It was really frustrating to me. So from there, I went and wrote a book called Building Automation Systems A to Z, and that did really, really well, which led me into a request by several of my students who read the book to create courses. And I created online courses, and that's kind of been the pattern throughout my life, is to just see something and do it and not kind of think about it. It drives my wife crazy that, I'm impulsive like that. I just go and see an opportunity and I take action. And sometimes you fail when you do that. Sometimes you don't fail. Sometimes you succeed beyond your wildest dreams. BAM is a business that's 5 years in the making, since 2017 of June of 2017. So it's almost at its 6-year mark. And the podcast was really something that I wanted to start because I felt that I'm, at least based on the feedback that I've heard from those of you who listen to the podcast, that I do a good job of explaining things in layman's terms and taking complex topics and breaking them down. Now, I realize for some of you who are fresh and brand new to the podcast that you may not know all the different content, because for the longest time, if I'm honest with myself, there was no plan for the podcast. It literally was wake up, whatever is on Phil's head, Phil's going to talk about, and that was it. That was the podcast. And towards about episode 80, I started to get much more strategic, started doing themes, started doing kind of from start to finish episode series. I would focus on things like training and careers. I would focus on IT, focus on doing different tasks as a BAS professional. And that's kind of what you're going to see moving into the next 100 episodes, is you're going to see a lot more interviews, almost if I can pull it off. And these interviews are actually really difficult to pull off because you got to schedule them. You've then got to do the editing. There's a lot to it. But if I can pull it off, I'm going to go and actually try to do every other episode or every 3 episodes being an interview, kind of pulling someone else, getting a different perspective of building automation and bringing it to the podcast. Another thing that I'm going to be doing in 2018 and in these next 100 episodes that'll carry into 2019 is going to be, as I mentioned, theme-based episode series. So, for example, I may go and do a series where I unpack installing a VAV controller. And I unpack in deep detail all the different aspects of it. How do you go and calculate your different transformer loads? How do you terminate wires? How do you mount controllers? How do you do SCR versus electric reheat? Those kind of things. I may actually go down that path where I do those kind of series. I'm not sure if installation is going to be the topic I cover or if I'm going to cover more IT and programming and integration, which kind of are my greatest areas of expertise. That's what my background is in IT and systems integration and design. So we may end up actually just focusing on that, but we'll see. Now, what I wanted to do for those of you who are new, and maybe those of you who have been around a while but don't remember, I wanted to highlight some of the most popular episodes, give an idea of what they are, why you should listen to them, and then from there, I wanted to close out kind of with what's coming out with BAM, not just the podcast, but BAM itself in 2018. So the first episode, and my most popular episode to date, is episode 39, and it's a deep dive on upgrading a building automation system. Now, this is a topic a lot of folks tend to struggle with, both from a design, a financing, an implementation, and a scoping perspective. And design and scoping are different. So scoping, you may say, hey, I'm going to go and retrofit the BAS, but design is actually designing that retrofit once the scope has been sold. So I really wanted to differentiate between those two words because quite often I hear folks getting those mixed up and they're not the same thing. But this is my most popular episode, I think, because I essentially am reading a chapter from my book, and that's basically what the episode is. And my book is structured in such a way that it's got a lot of step-by-step processes on how to upgrade a building automation system. And we're seeing that a lot of building automation systems, since folks are leaving the industry who had the expertise to maintain legacy systems, we're seeing that there's this need to focus on upgrading. And quite honestly, upgrading is a skill that there's not a lot of talent around. It's something that's quite difficult for a lot of folks outside of the rip and replace upgrades, which is usually where folks tend to lean towards is, I'm just going to rip out everything and replace it. That's not an upgrade. That's a wholesale installation of a new BAS. So an upgrade is where parts, whether they're field controllers, whether they're supervisory devices, whether they're servers, are left intact. And that's what this episode goes through. So that's episode 39. And towards the end of the video, I'll give you the show notes link for this episode, which will have links to all the previous episodes. Next up is episode 47, and it's a look at what is IT and a look at IT networking. This was a really popular and still continues to be a really popular episode because folks tend to struggle with understanding what is IT, like what's an IT group, what do they do, how do they work, and then what is the networking aspect of IT. Now, granted, there's a lot more to IT than networking. There's servers, databases, remote desktops, computer and server management, patch management, APIs, integration, troubleshooting. I mean, the list goes on and on. But when we tend to think about IT, information technology, as a BAS professional, we tend to think about networking. We tend to think about, I need IP addresses, I need switches, I need routers, how do I get my BBMDs to talk, all those kind of things. And that's what this episode unpacks. It really unpacks a general overview of networks and how networks work, how they're structured, why they exist, and how does the terminology relate to building automation professionals. So I've seen a lot of good feedback on that. Now, surprisingly, episode 4, everything you need to know about IP addresses, and I'm actually going to confirm that that's episode 4 because that doesn't sound right. I may have wrote that wrong, but I'm actually going to confirm that. Yeah, actually that is right. Wow. See, that's one of the cool things about going back and doing this recap episode is, honestly, I've got so much content here that sometimes I forget what I created. I didn't realize that I talked about IP addresses that early in the podcast because IP addresses weren't something that really came to the forefront and came up until last year, really, with all these manufacturers releasing IP-enabled controls. So I'm kind of surprised I talked about that, but that's pretty cool. So IP address, that episode, essentially is I'm unpacking all these different aspects of IP addresses. I'm talking about what they are, how they work, why they are used, the different terminologies, the different aspects of static and dynamic addresses, basically a primer on IP addresses that'll get you really solid on understanding that concept, which with all these vendors going IP enabled controls, whether it's wired, wireless, or whatever, doesn't matter. Because of IP addresses, you're able to kind of go and configure those IP controllers, whether they're wired or wireless or cellular. They all use IP addresses typically for their addressing. Next up is episode 17, and this one really surprised me that there was so much just feedback and engagement and viewership, and that's the how, what, and why of PID loops, episode 17. Now, PID loops, or proportional integral derivative loops, are a tough subject for a lot of folks to understand. For one, they're a programming concept. For two, they require mathematics. And for three, they require variables that actually adjust themselves as the loop operates. What are PID loops? They essentially are process loops, so they're looking at a set point and they're looking at a measurement called a process variable, and then looking at the deviation between those 2 points, how long those points have been essentially not aligned, and then going and driving an output based on that misalignment, that delta, that difference between the process variable and the actual set point. So PID loops are something that a lot of folks struggle with, and they're a necessary evil on pretty much every programming situation where you're going to be doing some form of proportional control, and even in some areas where you're doing sequenced control, you're still going to use a PID loop and then take that loop and output it to a sequencer block or something like that. So this was a popular episode as it really helped folks start to understand PID loops and that they're not that difficult. Next up is episode 52, which is a deep dive into BACnet. I've gotten a lot of questions around BACnet as of late, and I believe this is because of IP controls. With IP controls, you're oftentimes communicating across multiple subnets, and I won't get into why you don't want to have 512 or 1024 IP controllers on a single subnet and how that creates a massive broadcast domain and just a huge nightmare of troubleshooting. But suffice to say, your network should usually be less than 254 devices or a /24 network. Now, if that's Greek to you, then you definitely need to listen to the IP address episode I previously mentioned. But BACnet is a protocol that has been largely adopted by pretty much every vendor. You still have some holdouts in the area of LAN, and occasionally you'll see Modbus, but that's more on metering and conveyance systems like elevators and things like that. But BACnet is your primary protocol that you're going to run into. And essentially, in this episode, I go through what is a protocol, why do they matter, how do they work, and especially BACnet. I talk about all the different aspects related to BACnet MSTP, BACnet IP, BBMDs, BDTs, all of those fun things that you need to know to configure a network. So this is a really solid episode if you find your BACnet terminology and your BACnet knowledge is just not quite where you want it to be. Now, some folks have asked if I'm going to get really deep into the BACnet virtual networks and things like that. Probably not going to go that deep because, quite honestly, if you understand your BACnet network instance, your BACnet ID, and your BBMD, those 3 concepts will carry you through most BACnet issues. And finally, I had one episode that I was really uncomfortable doing because I'm not a recruiter. I'm not someone who goes quite often, and although I teach people to be successful in their careers, I create amazing online courses that help folks succeed in their careers, and I've seen great success from my students who went through my courses. It was really awesome to see those of you at ASHRAE who came up to me and shook my hand and said, "Hey, Phil, thanks for doing your courses. They're really helping. And thanks for doing your podcast." I mean, that meant a lot to me, those of you who came up. It's a complete, absolute honor that you spend your time listening to me And the fact that I get that time with you, I don't take that lightly. I try to give you a really well put together show that will educate you. But as I was saying, I was uncomfortable with doing episode 79 because I was, how do I address BAS careers? It's this kind of topic that, depending on what company you work for, will look completely different. And I didn't want to steer someone down the path of doing something wrong. For instance, I've had students come to me, or potential students come to me, and they say, I have no BAS background. Should I take your BAS course, and will that get me a job? And oftentimes I want to be straightforward with expectations. If you go in and you take the designing a BAS course and you have no experience with HVAC or BAS, you're not going to learn as much as a student who maybe has 1 or 2 years of BAS or has an HVAC background. So when I thought about this careers guide, I was, how do I tell people what to do? So I started to look at the different roles and kind of talk through the natural progression I'd seen working with a bunch of different BAS companies. And I found that was really well received. I got a lot of feedback, a lot of questions. I think I might actually do a season, probably right around when I'm launching BAM Premium, which is my mentorship program. When I'm launching that in April of this coming year, I think that I will do a series where I go through each individual role: installer, designer, programmer, project manager, and kind of talk through the expectations of each role, because that's something that I think a lot of people really want to hear. They have this idea of BAS, but they don't really know what the career path looks like. And we in the BAS industry are not very good at creating career paths for people. We're not very good at creating a goal and laying out a plan and helping folks realize that they can have a career. I mean, oftentimes it's, I'll become a programmer, but then I'll learn to be a little bit better of a programmer, and such company will pick me up and they'll give me a $2 an hour raise. And then I'll become a little bit better of a programmer, and then so-and-so will pick me up. But we never talk about, what do you do? Are you a programmer for the rest of your life? What do you do? And that's kind of what I unpack in episode 79. Now, there's a lot coming in 2018, and I'm going to kind of break it into 3 silos, right? So the first silo is the BAS Summit Conference that I'm working on, that I'm looking to launch in the fall. I'm essentially going to take 30 experts, and I'm going to interview them on Skype or on GoToWebinar. I haven't decided yet. And I'm going to take these interviews, and over the period of 5 days, I'm going to release 6 of these video interviews a day. And the conference is going to be completely free. So it's going to be awesome. If you're someone who feels very comfortable in front of the camera and you feel you could educate, I'd love to talk to you. Just shoot me an email at phil@philzito.com. I'd love to talk to you about being part of that conference. It's a free conference that's going to be completely online. And I like to do things that I see other industries doing that are working well that our industry isn't doing. And I think this is going to work really, really well. And then those folks who don't catch the videos all during that day or want the recordings of the videos, they could go and purchase all of the recordings for $99. So it's going to be really affordable. No, $2,000, $3,000 seminars here. Then also, we're going to be looking at a complete course roadmap for the rest of this year, starting with control sequence fundamentals, moving into programming fundamentals, install fundamentals, project management fundamentals, business finance fundamentals, and potentially even system integration fundamentals. So going to have a very broad course line, and I'm working to create a very deliberate path of bringing someone in, teaching them the fundamentals. And essentially the goal is to give folks 5 years of knowledge within a couple months. So you're going to see a lot of courses coming out. The final thing that is going to be happening is I'm in the works with a couple major manufacturers to resell my courses. They've seen the value of my courses. They've seen how it will impact their system integrators as well as their students of their own certification courses. And so they're going to be working with me to resell my courses. And that, I think, is going to be a huge boost to the business, because these companies, once I announce them, you're going to know who they are. I mean, we're talking tier one building automation companies. So that's going to be pretty awesome. And the final thing that's coming in 2018 is I'm going to try to start doing in-person training. Now, let me be clear on what that means. That does not mean Phil Zito is going to travel to your site and train your team. Right now, I have no desire to do that in my business. My business model is very much focused on my family, which is create courses one time that can be accessed forever. I do a pretty good job of that. I've gotten great feedback on that, and that is my business model. However, I do want to start looking at doing in-person training here in Milwaukee solely because of two things. One, I think that if I do it right, I can actually create a course and do the in-person course and then have someone videotape the course, and I can kind of kill two birds with one stone. I can go and create a course. I can then videotape that course. I can give folks in-person training, get to meet some of my students, and also create a course at the same time. And, if I have to do little tweaks after I see how the videos come out, that's fine. But I think that would be pretty awesome. Second is I really want to go and do some things that are hands-on that I think you can only really do in person. And then once I've done that, I'll videotape that in person hands-on and then create a kit for folks to work with. For example, an installation course. That's really something you need to be hands-on. So the students would buy a kit that would include a controller, some sensors, a transformer, and we would wire up these controllers and we would basically go through the entire install process, both the learning aspect as well as the creation aspect, the installation aspect. And then I would record that and I would make that kit available for online students. And I think that will kind of give me best of both worlds. So that's what I'm thinking with that. So this is a shorter episode than normal. I've got a little bit of a cold post ASHRAE. I spoke at the ASHRAE conference teaching Building Automation Systems 101. It was a packed room. It was an absolute honor to be there. I think it was room for 200, and there are folks standing along the back and along the sides because there was no more room to sit down. So that was pretty cool for my first really big speech. And then I've got a speech coming up at the Smart Buildings Conference, depending on when you're listening to this, in February in Amsterdam. And I'm really excited about that as well. So definitely looking to up the speaking in 2018 as well. So that's it. That's kind of my State of the Union. That's my 100th episode recap. I didn't want to do something goofy where I pull excerpts out and you have no context about the experts or excerpts and you're like, why is Phil going and sharing this with me? I wanted to just kind of give you my most popular episodes by listens, tell you what they are, give you a description, and then give you the links in the show notes so that you can go back and listen to those yourselves. So with that being said, that is episode 2018, and you can find everything I've discussed at buildingautomationmonthly.com 100. And I just realized I said that was episode 2018. That would be nice. But no, that was episode 100. And like I said, you can find episode 100 at buildingautomationmonthly.com /100. And I really encourage you to check out my online courses because they will help you to really accelerate where you are in your building automation career. All right, folks, that's it for now. And I will talk to you all in next week's episode where I will be interviewing Ryan Hewson from Optigo, and we'll be discussing IT and OT networks and what are field networks, both IP field networks and field bus networks. So until later, take care and keep on pushing and learning and trying to make yourself better every day. Thanks so much for listening. Have a great day.